Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. Monsignor Kupke, welcome again.
Thank you.
I think that we're going to finish chapter 8 today.
You have such dreams.
No, almost as chock full as chapter 6 was. But in our last episode, we were talking about the influx of Spanish-speaking Catholics in the era 1947 to 1963, and this. I remember the strong Puerto Rican population in Dover when I was a child.
Right.
So the Puerto Rican population in Dover came from a rather specific place, it sounds like.
Yes.
Aguadano or something? Or
Basically,
yeah, something like that.
Yes. Yeah. The original group,
Okay.
Much like the Italians did, yeah.
So because
basically we had three large Latino communities, Paterson, Passaic, and Dover.
And would they have been Puerto Rican at this point?
Almost
mostly?
all Puerto Rican,
Yeah.
yes. Initially, that fades away quickly as
other
all
Cubans
the Latin American
and,
nations
start to emigrate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is very interesting is that I don't know if this is accurate to say, but the first priest that ministered to the Spanish-speaking community was
Chinese.
Yeah. Thaddeus Lee. So
Well,
tell us about Thaddeus Lee.
There are actually two of them, three of them.
3 Chinese priests.
Yeah, Stanley Chang, Thaddeus Lee, and John Lai. But we remember Teddy Lee because he's the one that stayed permanently. He never went back.
Yeah, and I remember him well.
Yeah.
I don't. How long ago did he die? It doesn't seem like that long ago.
About 8 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. He must have been a young guy.
What happened is that, again, it's all who you know, and 6 degrees of separation. Bishop McNulty, his brother, John McNulty,
Who we heard about a couple episodes ago.
right, was the president of Seton Hall University.
Mm-hmm.
And Seton Hall, early in the game, began to offer programs in Asian studies.
Interesting.
They had connections with some of the areas that were falling under communist domination in the Far East. At one point, Cardinal Paul Yu Pin of Nanking was a teacher at Seton Hall.
Oh, wow.
And so was President Ngo Dinh Diem of Vietnam, also on the faculty of Seton Hall, in their Asian Studies department.
Just refresh my memory. The after World War II, when does China become a communist regime?
Basically the late 1940s.
Okay, so this is right around that time.
So at any rate, John McNulty has a lot of connections in the Chinese, Far East Asian world. So his brother, James, suddenly is aware that he has this growing Latino presence in his diocese. So he talks to his brother about this. And his brother says, I have the solution.
I happen
to be aware of a number of priests who were sent by their bishop in China to study theology in Spain. And now, with the fall of China to the communism, they can't go home.
Oh, boy.
They can't go back. They're like displaced persons. So Bishop McNulty welcomes these people into the Paterson Diocese, and 3 of them in particular begin working in Passaic and Paterson and in Dover. Monsignor Chang eventually went back and worked in Taiwan. But he would always come back every summer to make a mission collection in Paterson.
Okay, good.
John Lai, I don't know whatever happened to him, but Teddy Lee would remain in Paterson for the rest of his life. You know?
Yes. Yeah.
He was proud of the fact that he was the president of the Association of Priests of his diocese in exile.
Oh.
So he kept them connected together.
Wow.
All over the world, you know, with this little prefecture apostolic of Linxing in China, you know, and actually toward the end of his life was able to go back to China a couple of times.
Where did he end up? Do you remember? In parish?
His last assignment was Holy Spirit and Pequoddy.
Oh, with Gene McQuaid?
With Gene McQuaid. Right.
As a parochial vicar?
Co-pastors, I think.
Oh,
actually.
Interesting. Wow. He was a nice man.
He was as nice as they come, yes. Yeah. We were always, you know, those of us who dealt with them, you know, sometimes you had trouble understanding his English and you wondered what his Spanish was like. But
that's true.
But they loved him, you know. They still referred to Padre Tadeo.
Yeah, nice.
You know,
yeah. I have a picture in your book of Sister Jane Sanchez, FMA. That would be a Salesian sister. And the Children of Our Lady of Fatima Mission, Passaic, preparing to depart for Fatima Day Camp in North Halden. So I don't know what caught me about this. It's a great picture of kids on a wood-sided car.
Yes, an old station wagon, you know, probably with no seat belts. There were probably 18 kids in that car. And
that's true. But would have been Spanish-speaking kids?
Right.
Yeah, and so Our Lady...
What Bishop McNulty did was create 3 missions, one in each of the cities.
Oh, okay.
So Our Lady of Providence in Our Lady of Fatima in Passaic, and initially St. John the Baptist in Dover, because John the Baptist is the patron saint of Puerto Rico.
Oh.
But eventually that changed to Our Lady Queen of the Rosary in Dover because we didn't want 2 John the Baptists.
Right.
Each of them, you know, had a slightly different... Our Lady of Providence ultimately was absorbed into, or it absorbed, Our Lady of Victories in Paterson.
Yes.
In Passaic, Our Lady of Fatima ultimately became a parish, a full-rank parish. It was interesting. The other 9 pastors of the city of Passaic asked Bishop Casey to elevate Our Lady of Fatima to parish status so that Teddy Lee could be a pastor, because they were all so fond of him. And they felt bad that he was at that point he had been in Passaic longer than anybody, but he was the only one in the city that was not a pastor. So they asked the bishop, you know, can we do something for him?
And did he become the pastor?
He became the pastor. They raised Fatima from mission to parish status. Now, of course, it has been conjoined to the oldest parish in the city, St. Nicholas.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people...
And the same thing has happened in Dover with Sacred Heart.
And Holy Rosary. But a lot of people don't realize how long that community has been in Dover. Holy Rosary.
Yes, since the mid-50s, early 50s. Well, to give you an idea... Father Rich Grasso, who was administrator of Dover, the first administrator in Dover, you know, he wrote back to Bishop Nava telling him, you know, what had happened in the mission in the past year. And he mentions that he had baptized, you know, X number of babies. One of the babies that he mentions is Rayo Rama.
Oh, yes.
The pastor of Blessed Sacrament in Paterson. So Ray is actually the first Latino priest of the diocese who was not born outside the country, but was born in Paterson.
I didn't realize Ray Rama goes back that far.
Yeah.
So I have a note here that Father Puma, Vince Puma, was assigned to Dover to do outreach with that Spanish-speaking community. Is that right?
That's right. He was only there a relatively short time because then he got pulled into Paterson to Our Lady of Providence, Our Lady of Victories. There were three constituents at the same time in Paterson. There was Our Lady of Victories, which was an older parish and was centered around the St. Jude Novena.
Yeah.
And then in their old building was the Spanish mission, Our Lady of Providence.
Right.
And there was also, for a brief time, a African-American mission,
Yes,
St. Peter Claver. And Puma pulled the three of them together into one entity.
Yeah.
And they all became different constituent parts of
the parish
of Our Lady of Victories.
Yeah. He was doing, found this really interesting, outreach to migrant workers from the farms of Morris County,
Right.
which had moved to Sussex County.
Right. These would be the farms like in Pequannock. You know, when you drive through Pompton Plains there by the Jacksonville Chapel.
Yeah. Between Montville and Pequannock,
That's where, and Wayne.
But Chester, right? The Chester area?
Chester area, right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're ministering to Spanish-speaking communities now in the diocese, but McNulty, you say, had a lively concern for a responsibility that's given to all bishops in canon law. So a lot of folks don't know this, but every bishop has a responsibility for the universal church.
Right.
Which John Paul II affirmed strongly, I think, in Redemptoris Missio. And in fact, parish priests share in that concern for the universal church by virtue of their relationship to the bishop. But you say McNulty really made sure that the diocese didn't forget this.
And I think it's one of the reasons why the clergy of his era looked on him with such fondness. You know, he was not just another Newark auxiliary. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but not just. It was McNulty who started to give the diocese an identity separate unto itself, and he did that by turning some of the focus of the diocese to other parts of the world. So first of all, he agrees to send priests to Latin America.
Yes.
Heeding John the 23rd's call to.
And was it Bolivia at first?
Bolivia, right, and then later Peru. He also was very involved in the AIDS, not the AIDS epidemic, but the Society of AIDS to the Church in Need, that for a brief time actually was headquartered in Paterson under his auspices. He was also, many people don't know this about him, but he was also on the board of directors of the group that the Legion of Decency.
Oh, okay.
That
you have a
censored
paragraph
movies.
in that.
Yeah. So he had
a lot of irons in the fire.
Yes, he did. Again, he had studied at Louvain in Belgium.
Yeah,
he had seen the wider world.
Bigger church,
And also, in this period too, was also one of the promoters of the cause of the canonization of the Little Flower's parents.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
So he had eyes that went beyond just New Jersey and just Paterson, and so some of that spilled over into his clergy. He began to send, he's the first one to send a student to the North American College in Rome.
Okay. Who was the first?
John Sullivan.
Oh, who was the second director of Mars Catholic High School.
Right, and the founding director of Newman Prep.
Okay. In 1962, he started to send priests to staff parishes.
in South America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did that for a number of years.
Yes, he asked for volunteers. John the 23rd had issued a call. This was a period when the Americans thought of the Western Hemisphere as two separate continents. There's North America and there's South America.
Yeah.
And John the 23rd suggested that you look at this as the Americas.
Yes.
Which was
John
not
Paul,
common in the
but John
mentality.
Paul continued that,
Yeah.
and Benedict and Francis.
So he called upon the North American diocese to share some of their resources, including personnel,
Yeah.
with Latin America. So many American dioceses would adopt a parish
Yes.
or diocese. It was not always a wild success. The guys from this country were not necessarily prepared for what they encountered in Latin
Hardship.
America.
Yeah.
But we went to Bolivia and
I think 2 parishes.
yes, and also took the Sisters of Charity.
Yeah, I saw the photo.
So that there was a little New Jersey delegation down there running.
And at some point, did these parishes then get native clergy and kind of we let them go, or
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, eventually one of the kids that they encounter, when they first get down there in this parish in where was Caranavi in Bolivia, ultimately will become the bishop of the diocese.
Oh, wow. I remember what I was going to say. I think Benedict and Francis spoke about cautioning the church against becoming self-referential and making sure that we look out in a missionary way, and that gives the church vibrancy. And I just can't help but think that it's in this era when McNulty is helping us to look outside of the diocese, that the diocese is kind of booming.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were connections too. One of the Franciscan priests who had served briefly as a curate at St. Bon's in Paterson
Becomes a bishop. His
in
name is Manning.
Manning, right. And also the Bishop of Cochabamba in Bolivia had, as an Italian, a Salesian, and he had a cousin in Paterson.
Oh, okay.
So there were,
Yes.
there were obvious reasons why we wound up in Bolivia.
Yeah. McNulty makes sure that the Archdiocesan newspaper, The Advocate, starts to report on Paterson.
Right.
And so there's a Paterson editor.
Right, Paul Nauer and Carl Wolfson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Priests of the diocese.
Not Paul Nauer, I'm sorry.
I know Carl Wolfson is one of them.
Carl Wolfson is one,
Yeah.
but later it's not Paul Nauer, but my predecessor in Florham Park, Paul Langevin.
Yeah, Paul Langevin. Wow. Okay. And so the Beacon's not going to come for a while.
No, the Beacon comes with Casey.
Okay. So
Casey was a frustrated country newspaper editor. I mean, if he hadn't been a priest, he would have been running a newspaper somewhere in central New York.
Yeah, we better not get to Casey yet because I want to wrap this up. So we have contemplative communities or Benedictine communities becoming abbeys.
Yeah. Yes.
So
St. Paul's Abbey in Morristown.
So it becomes
Newton, rather.
Does that mean it becomes its own entity in some way?
Becomes its own self-governing. Yes. Right.
So before that, they were associated with.
They were kind of the Newton is part of a branch of the Benedictines that has a missionary endeavor.
Yeah, I remember now.
Right, the St. Otilian congregation.
Yes, we talked about it.
So they're a priory at first, but then
they get an abbot.
They become a separate.
So that
abbey.
happens in this era,
right?
And it happens at St. Mary's del Barton, correct?
Well, that would take 3 episodes to explain their routine, but basically, they make a switch.
Okay. I do remember this vaguely.
They asked the Holy See to switch the title of the abbey from Newark to Morristown. So Morristown, which had been a priory, becomes the abbey, and Newark, which had been the abbey, becomes the priory.
Yeah. Okay. And
it was all due to their inability to expand in Newark, because, Newark Abbey is one of the few urban Benedictine monasteries.
I remember we talked about this.
And they were so closed in that they didn't have property to expand it. But then the Newark riots took care of that and opened up property that they picked up quickly.
Yeah. The Sisters of Charity mature.
Yes.
And become a
pontifical.
Yeah, so they'd been a diocesan community?
They had been a diocesan community all this time. And
under the authority of the bishop.
Right. But once the Paterson diocese is established and they suddenly find themselves with a bulk of their nuns in one diocese, but under the jurisdiction of another diocese, it gradually dawns on them that maybe we are grown to the point where we become a pontifical right.
Which means
institute.
that they are somewhat
directly
autonomous.
relate to the Congregation for Religious.
Yeah, in Rome.
So that left only the Ringwood Franciscans as a diocesan.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to wrap this up. The last part of your chapter is Prelude to Change. And you talk about the growing involvement of lay people, the growing involvement of the laity in the liturgy. You talk about the development of I don't know if it's an office at this point, but a family life movement. There's all kinds of things that you place under the category of prelude to change. So maybe just briefly, what's on the horizon? What's happening? What's fermenting? What's coming?
I think the early 50s are a period when, again, referring to this war group that comes back. As they begin to mature and raise families and move up in the business world and everything. They're also beginning to move up in their understanding of church.
Yes.
And so this is beginning to take hold in different parishes. There were people sometimes erroneously think that all the liturgical changes happened on one bad day after Vatican II, but in reality, it was already in the mix in the early 50s.
Yeah.
So the notion of having lay commentators at Mass,
people knowing parts of the responses.
You could ask the bishop for permission to do a dialogue Mass where the entire congregation began to take up the responses of the altar. So there was a growing awareness of liturgy in particular.
And so this idea that the active participation of the laity, the universal call to holiness, that this happens as a result of Vatican II is really not entirely accurate.
It didn't come down out of nowhere. It had been from the national liturgical weeks. There's just a slow if you walked into a church in 1955, say, you would be startled at the number of people in the pews with enormous missals following along, and the fact that they were doing this successfully.
Yeah, I remember those.
Says that there was an interest.
Yeah, I remember my father's missal.
Yeah. I mean, people were not willing to just sit there and pray the rosary. While the priest ranted on, they wanted to know what was going on, and that slowly begins to stir the pot, if you will, and
becomes a prelude to change.